Hey everyone, now let's focus in on those factors that can cause a shift in demand for labour. Now these factors are very different from what we considered last time. Last time we really considered movements along the demand curve when wage rates change. So if the price of a good changes, you see a movement along that demand curve. For labour, it is exactly the same. When the actual price of labour or the wage rate changes, you see a movement along the demand curve. Here we're going to look at the specific factors which can cause a shift in demand. Okay, to understand this, really we must go back to how we actually calculate that marginal revenue product. So to get a figure on this, or to get a real handle on what is going on here, we need to go back to this calculation. And to work this out, we've got to consider the actual marginal physical product that's being produced by the worker. So that is the change in the total product generated multiplied by the marginal revenue. So that is the change in the total revenue which is attributable to that additional worker employed. Okay, so what we can see from this first side of this calculation is really that this is derived from productivity. So if the worker becomes, or if workers generally become more productive, then you could expect to see an increase in demand for those workers. Now, of course, direct result of that, if you're dealing with a higher quantity here, then you would see an increase in the actual marginal revenue product, okay? And so this corresponds with our first point, change in labour productivity. So, for instance, if you consider that some students may attend a particular vocational course for a particular role, or some students may undertake a specific degree program with a particular role again in mind. If those future employees can be seen as being that much more productive in the workplace, the firm will experience an increase in demand for those types of workers because they are so productive, and their marginal revenue productivity would be higher than workers who aren't enrolled on that course. Okay, so as a direct result of that, we would see a shift in demand from our demand curve here at D1 out to the right hand side, of course, an increase in demand to D2, and from that we can see, if we keep the wage level constant here, that we've got W1 as the wage, and we go from E1 to E2 in terms of the actual employment in that that market. Okay, so that's our first point. Our second point is changes in the price of capital goods. Okay, so if the price of capital goods goes up, then again you're likely to see an increase in demand for workers. Now the reason for this is because it's more expensive to actually substitute labour for capital, of course. Likewise, if the price of capital goods goes down, then you're likely to see a fall in the demand for labour. And that would lead to a reduction in employment in the industry. So if the price of capital goods, machineries, computers and so on, other goods that are used to actually produce final goods, okay, final output, then what would happen overall is that the demand curve for labour would shift to the left, and firms would substitute labour for capital. Okay, our third point is changes in the final price of the good. Okay, now this relates to this side of our calculation. So if there is an increase in this price of the actual final price of the good that is being produced by the labour force, then again that will translate to an overall increase in the marginal revenue product, assuming that that's of course coming from an increase in demand, okay, rather than simply cost push inflation, for instance. Okay, so that would then boost the level of demand for employees in that sector. So if you see that sort of thing taking place at an increase in the actual price, then it is going to have a direct impact on the marginal revenue product. Really, it's then a matter of determining what will happen to the marginal revenue product as a result of that. If it is simply because that the cost of ingredients has risen for that particular good, then there may actually be a fall in demand for labour, because people might be substituting from that consumer good to a different consumer good. Okay, and our final one is about changes in demand for the good. So this really relates to this side of our calculation here. So if there's a direct increase in the actual quantity sold, again, there would be an increase in demand. Okay, so we can see the increase shifting out to the right, the decrease shifting to the left. So likewise, if there was a fall in demand for a given good, and of course you see this with seasonal employment, okay, whether it's summer holidays, whether it's winter work, whether it's staff working over Christmas time, okay, you see that taking place, and there is a reduction in demand when the off season occurs. Okay, so there we go, nice and straightforward. Thanks guys.